Is it okay if I stand, brothers and sisters? Is that easier for you? Inshallah, if I stand. We'll go ahead and begin because of the time. So if you didn't get a chance to catch up on Lecture 1, Lecture 1 was basically the foundation of what we're discussing today. Lecture 1 covered the history, it covered the linguistics of the meaning of epistemology and the Islamic perspective behind that. We spoke of some things that are important behind the concept of Islamic epistemology. So before we proceed, I'd just like to ask some of the brothers that attended if they remember any particular or important things that are connected to the topic at hand that we spoke of in Lecture 1. Do you brothers remember anything particular? And or if you look to the slides?
Yeah, so basically the term epistemology is a Greek term. It means to know the reality of knowledge, and also the scope and role of knowledge in society.
Very good, inshallah. Did we give some examples? Do you recall any examples we spoke of?
In the Islamic paradigm?
Either one, both paradigms.
Yeah, so the things that have been perceived to be true and real may not necessarily be true and real, in actual sense. Like, you gave the example of the stick in the water. From an angle it seems that the stick is bent, but actually it's not bent. And you also give examples in the Islamic perspective about different interpretation of ayats of Quran. That people may perceive it in a way that is not actually corresponding with the actual meaning.
Very good. So basically, brothers and sisters, the idea behind the philosophical perspective of epistemology is that not everything you know means it's correct. And not everything you see means it's correct. The brother gave an example, which is a cup of water, and if you were to place a pen inside of it, in the distance it looks like it's crooked, it turns. But the pen is actually straight. What you have seen something that is deceiving to the eye and to the intellect. Because if you knew the actuality of what this cup held and the stick that it was straight, you would not have said that, for example, the water or the pen is bent. Same idea actually in Facebook Live. I gave the example to the brothers the other day. There was a brother who was sitting and he was giving a lecture on Facebook Live, and what happened was he was drinking with his right hand, his right hand. On Facebook Live, it gave a mirror image. It showed that it was his left hand that he was drinking with. So because of that, people may get confused between these type of things. Another example we talked about is the example of language. So now, if we were to look to a book, for example, in the English language, and we were to read it from left to right, we could understand what is being said. If we were to read it from right to left, we would not be able to understand clearly what is being said. But the idea is that if we were to take this book and we were to place it in the mirror, we would not be able to read it from left to right. We'd have to alter our motive in order to comprehend what is being said. So the ideology philosophically, historically, in Greek philosophy, epistemology was basically the science of knowledge. The science that information that you may know doesn't necessarily mean it is correct. The sight you see doesn't necessarily mean that this sight is the actual elements or construction of what your brain has interpreted. In this regard, what happens was we use this philosophy basically on some examples in the Islamic perspective. We gave a few examples behind that. One of the examples, just to refresh our memory, is the example in Arabic which is called rumman. And rumman is a fruit in Arabic which is translated as pomegranate. It's in a verse from Surah Al-Rahman, the chapter of the merciful. What happens is in the chapter there is a reference that says فِيهَا فَاكِهَةٌ وَنَخْلٌ وَرُمَّانٌ, a concept of this everlasting happiness, a concept of an abode in which there isn't sadness. In this abode there is fruits that is mentioned. In it there is date palm, but also in it that is described or illustrated is pomegranate. Pomegranate, the fruit that many of us know. Oregon is not necessarily native to pomegranate fruit, but they import it from other areas. So because of this, a question arises. We spoke of the spirit of the letter, or is it the goal, the letter itself? The spirit of the information that is provided, or is the goal taking it in the letter itself? And actually, it's the spirit of the letter that is the goals behind information. So because of this example, we talked about pomegranate. Why is that important? It's because if we were to read the verse, we might say that in paradise, for example, in this abode of happiness, among Islamic theologians, we would say that if we were to go to Winco Foods, we can find in the stand of Winco Foods pomegranate, and we were to take this pomegranate from Winco Foods, that this pomegranate that I hold in my hands is what is being described in the Quran about an abode that is different to this realm. And the response to that is no, it is not. Why is that? It's because the only similarity between the two elements is in linguistics. There is a sharing of letters, but the semantics, as we talked about, is different. That's why you find, for example, actually early scholars of exegesis of the Quran, they said, such as Abdullah ibn Abbas, he said that the only similarity between these descriptions is only in linguistics, the letter constructions of things. The actuality of matter is different. So the semantics is different. The phonetics could be same, the meaning is different. Now that being said, something to consider in the same light is because pomegranate was a representation. It was a representation of, you can say, ease. It was a representation of feeling replenished. It was a representation that indeed a person is a state of higher satisfaction. Pomegranate is specified. If we were to talk about pomegranate with the people of the north and Alaska and these things, they might not know what is pomegranate. We show them the eye, look, pomegranate. Imagine. So the idea is the spirit behind it. People don't necessarily understand that in life there's an element of sadness. It's called hazan in Arabic. And one of the goals in the Islamic methodology is to take away this sadness. And among these goals in Islamic methodology of taking away this sadness is this abode that is described as paradise, that is shared by other theological beliefs. In this abode, one of the highest qualities that is illustrated is la tahzan, there's no more sadness here. So this is something really to think about. Now, that being said, Islamic epistemology basically gives a person the tools, and it talks about the tools and the goals of Islamic information. A person approaches a particular text. Now we have to use certain tools so that we are able to comprehend this text better. So just because I think the verse or information means something, it doesn't mean it's true. And this is something just to recalculate within ourselves. That was what we talked about, a summarized version in the first lecture. We got into many details, we used verses, we talked about linguistics, the pronoun, we talked about the pronominal, which is the dhamir, and the pronominal by itself. I hope that one day we'll cover it, because that is one of the things I believe, humbly, that many people have gotten confused about things just because they didn't have the strength in the pronominal, certain element of grammar. Things to consider, inshallah. We eventually left off or ended the lecture on the topic of usul al-fiqh, the foundations and understanding of jurisprudence. Why is this important just to build off of it is because what happens is at times we are exposed to information and the information doesn't necessarily correlate to that which is from the pillars of the Islamic teachings. So now, for example, from the rules or pillars, the jurisprudent foundations of the Islamic teachings are some of these verses here. We're going to give some examples here, because we talked about this previously. One of those examples from the foundations of Islam, Islamic sciences, that is, knowledge, information, is وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةُ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. This is well known ayah. However, what happens is people tend to forget that this is from the foundations of Islam, Islamic jurisprudence, that is. So now we have this verse, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةُ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. A person is not held accountable for the other person's actions, both in court and also, for example, in the sight of God. One day, among the philosophers, when you stand before God, there is no oppression. وَلَا يَظْلِمُ رَبُّكَ أَحَدًا. The Almighty doesn't oppress anyone in the least. So now, for example, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةُ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. From the early periods, these foundations, and there are more to them, these are just examples, were used to respond to philosophies that didn't necessarily correlate to that which is of the foundations. a person comes and he tells Aisha, she is a leading scholar in Islam, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, and she tells him that, a person tells her that people are saying that a person, when they pass away, the crying of the person, the people around them, to the deceased is harmed by it, is harmed by the crying. Now she listened to this and she said she's a scholar of Islam. Okay, and we talked about a side point just for our knowledge, just for our sister, and because there was a Sisters' March yesterday. In the books of authenticating information among Islamic scientists, they never, ever gave a biography about a female who fabricated information about the Prophet or Islam. Imagine that. So it's full of men. This man fabricated information, this other man, he fabricated information. They never brought a single female with regards to this. So this is a very interesting point. We go back to this and she said, how is that so? When we have a very clear foundational verse in the Quran where it says, no bearer of burdens shall bear the burden of another. No one's accountable for the actions of another person. This is a very important thing to consider. So for example, to build off of that, just for our thoughts, certain cultures in history, they used to, when there was a child that was born illicitly, out of marriage, they used to look to this child in a negative fashion. And this child, for example, would not be able to represent them in some type of prayer. Whatever culture it may be, we don't want to get into too many details. And this child would not be able, for example, to do such and such job because it is a child out of wedlock. So we look, how is that so when the foundations, I'm talking about in theology here, in philosophy, in Islamic philosophy, Islamic epistemology, how is that so when the foundation says, no bearer of burden shall bear the burden of another person? So in the light of traditional religious philosophy, many of us know, for example, there is a sense of denunciation of children out of wedlock, traditionally. We look to the Judeo-Christian monotheistic approaches, they agree upon this. Similarly, in Hinduism, among other religions as well. It's not a strange concept just for among the Islamic dogma per se. But this verse comes to play. Do you see? This foundation comes to play. How is that so, that this individual cannot do this, or is lesser in the sight of God because of something he has nothing to do with? So this was something they talked about. And they said, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةُ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. It is contradictory to that of the foundational elements. We move on. وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ. In the religion, God has not placed hardship within it. So this is a very strong foundational verse. A person is sick, and you found, if you look through the traditional fashion of prayer, there's a standing position, there's the bowing position, there's the prostration position. And these positions weren't necessarily something new. I mean, historically in the Islamic light. Because prostration, for example, was something that was practiced among the pre-Islamic Arabs in that region. It was something that was practiced by the Western Christians of the European regions when they prayed. It was something that was practiced by the Eastern Christians as well, in the Byzantine Empire, for example, prostration of prayer, the bowing of prayer. So when a person, for example, looks to the books of Matthew or Mark in the New Testament, you find verses that talk about these positions. And as a side point, just for our knowledge, I don't know if many people know this, historically, when we know that Muhammad, he claimed to receive revelation in the year 570 in the AD and CE. What happens is, 40 years later, he claims to receive revelation. 570, he's born. 40 years later is when he claims approximately, which is about 610. Okay? So this is 610 years after the birth of Jesus, or after Jesus himself. In this light, what happens is, there was an era, as you can see, in the Arabian Peninsula before the concept of Muhammad, isn't that right? But what happened was they had practices that aren't necessarily, they are actually, certain practices relate to practices that are practiced now in Islamic theology. From those practices, the concept of revering a house of worship, such as the Kaaba. Okay? And one of those practices, maybe some of us know, If a person has land there, there's a concept of circumambulation, which is a tawaf. In the tawaf in of itself wasn't something new. It was something that was practiced beforehand, and the Arabs used to claim that it was a practice of their father Abraham and Ismail, historically. Now why am I talking about this? Just for our knowledge. Is because actually Christians, among Muslim and non-Muslim historians, when they talked about the regions and also the demographics of that region, we know there were polytheistics, there were monotheistics, I mean before Muhammad ﷺ, and they were called Hanaf or Hanafiya, and there were Christians and there were Jews. For example, in Ghassan was a Christian Arab people. They were at the border, and there were Jews as well, many other tribes, which many people know about historically. But what happens is, Christians and Jews used to actually go to the Kaaba. People don't know that. Certain Arab Christians and Arab Jews, they used to go to the Kaaba and they would give reverence to the Kaaba, and they used to speak of God by the name of who? By the name of Allah. So these are Arab Christians and Jews during that time. So this is something I think is very important just to clarify at this point, just for us to think about. Why are we talking about this? When we talk about there is no hardship in religion, there are things that a person it's out of their hand. Do you see? There are goals in Islam, and the goals of Islam is that we don't want to throw a person into destruction. For example, Allah says, وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ. Don't throw yourselves into destruction. وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِكُمْ رَحِيمًا. Don't kill yourselves. Really, God is merciful to you. And many other verses. So because of this was a code that was basically held onto by the theologians throughout the centuries. They talked about things. A person's unable to pray standing. They pray sitting. A person's unable to pray sitting, and they pray laying down. A person's unable to perform ablution for prayer because it is too cold, then they do tayammum, right? If a person is unable to, for example, perform tayammum and they know wudu, ablution, and they know that they will get sick, not by the cold by itself, but because it weakens the body. When the body is placed into cold, it weakens the body. And we know in science that cold by itself doesn't make a person sick. It's what happens to the body in that state. It basically lowers the defenses and it exposes itself to germs and these type of things. So these type of things, Islam talked about, then don't do wudu with water, then do it with tayammum. If a person is sick and you're unable to perform this ablution, then you use a different route. Why is that important? Is because there are many things that a person faces in their everyday lives in which these type of codes should be in the mind memorized. These type of codes should be in the mind memorized. Not everyone can, for example, memorize the entire Quran. That by itself doesn't make a person a scholar. This is very important for us to know. Because again, nowadays people are facing so much on quantity, they forget quality. They're facing so much, they're focusing so much on memorizing letters, but they're forgetting the spirit that is behind this information. Previously, they used to talk about scholars being people who understood. You see, I'll give you an example. There was an individual historically in Spain, Islamic Spain. His name was Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi, rahimahullah ta'ala. He was talking about this particular point. And he said, you know, the scholars of this so-and-so area, just a few of them memorized the entire Quran. He's talking about all of these great scholars. He said the elite of them, just a few of them memorized the Quran. Because it was a time period when they knew the importance of understanding. It wasn't a time period in which quantity was over quality. Nowadays, unfortunately, it's quantity over quality. How much you can recite, how much you can say, but where's those that comprehend? This is a real fact. It's really unfortunate for us to consider. So God, in His goals, in the observation, when I say God, I mean in the observation of Islamic dogma, had called for the betterment of the self. And in this betterment, there's a spiritual betterment and there's also physical betterment. In the physical betterment, God doesn't want people to throw themselves into destruction, into harm. And this is an extremely important point. This by itself is a long topic. This rule by itself is a long topic. What we're doing now, we're just reviewing these things for a particular goal of the lecture today, inshallah. Yes, sir?
I want to add something on these. It's just a comment. That these ayahs, like we have it 4 here, but each one actually mentioned in the Quran many times.
Yeah.
It's like this is something emphasize the importance of these concepts.
Yes.
It has so many ayahs.
Yeah, synonyms of them. I know what you mean. You don't mean by letter. You mean by meaning. There are many places in the Quran وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى is a famous theme. That is correct in a number of verses. However, وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ is not as common. You will find it in certain verses that have a connotation that is similar to it. This is a prophetic teaching, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. So you have certain ayahs that have a connotation in the meaning. Same thing for this, and the others we'll discuss shortly in a short period. Yes, ma'am, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, I was just wondering, you just gave an example of how everybody was doing tawaf and they had rituals and they used to refer to God by the same name. And then you moved on to this ayah. I was just trying to draw the distinction about whether this is something that Islam brought or was also already present in what was happening. I think I misunderstood your example earlier.
Okay, so when I was talking about that, what I was trying to lead to is that prayer and the ritualistic aspect of prayer is not necessarily new to Islam. So I wanted to reach this goal because I wanted to give an example that we could look to when we thought about this code, this religious code. In that, in prayer, if you can't stand, then sit down. And this code actually is a very powerful code, and one might argue it's actually shared by other historical religions as well, this code here. So this was the idea. We gave a brief overview for us to grab a greater grasp, and at the same time for us to step aside for a second and think about something. If there were, for example, Christian Arabs and Jewish Arabs before the advent of the Prophet Muhammad who lived in the area and used to go to the Kaaba, it means that the Kaaba in of itself was a revered substance. It wasn't something new to the mind of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Furthermore, the concept that these individuals would go there and they would think of Allah, and they used to say Allah in Arabic, that means that Allah is not the moon god, for example, as some people are claiming nowadays. Certain people that write polemics about Islam, they try to give refutations and or arguments against it. They say that Allah was actually the moon god. And that's not correct historically, linguistically, and many other things. Allah linguistically doesn't take gender. It is a word that doesn't take gender. It does have a masculine voice to it. However, at the same time, something to think about is because we know in Islamic philosophy, there is the names and attributes of God, correct? So in the names and attributes of God, these beautiful names, He has, for example, Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim. And those are words which means the merciful, and Rahim is a type of intimate mercy, like a friendship type of mercy, a close relationship type of mercy. People don't know linguistically, these words actually come from a root word which is called rahim, which is the womb of the female. Okay, this is the womb of the female. People don't know this. Why is that important? It's because in the early period of Muhammad's message, he came and he preached things. So these individuals, the political circumstance, the situation in that time, what they used to do is they would look to this man, and they had a status quo. If you were rich, that means that was a direct meaning that you were pleased by God. If you held a position, that was a direct meaning that you were pleased by God. And your gender also meant that you were directly pleased by God. So females were immediately second-class citizens just by birth, just because of this concept, philosophy. So many of the early Muslims, people don't know, is that they were actually females. Many of the early Muslims were females, many of them. Many of them were slaves. Many of them were females, some of them were children. There were time periods when this was the basic political, social makeup of the followers of this individual named by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is important. So from these females were very educated people. Many know, actually it's arguably the first person to enter into Islam was Khadija, who was a female. Many of us know, but she was extremely intellectual. She was very smart. She had so much power. And this was a person who chose the methodology of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we'll move on, brothers and sisters. A third example of these things is that إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, all actions are based upon intention. وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَىٰ, and every person is basically recompensed for the things they intended. So every one of us has an intent, and none of us know the other person's intent. This is something of the seclusive, and that's why there's a verse in the Quran that says قُلْ إِن تُخْفُوا مَا فِي صُدُورِكُمْ أَوْ تُخْفُوهُ يَعْلَمُهُ اللَّهُ. That which you hide within yourself, whatever you hide, God knows. This is the most important thing. That is why, for example, a person from the appearance may seem of a very negative circumstance. And a person from the outside will say, oh man, this guy's situation with God is disastrous. However, they could be very close with God because of the intent that is there, because of that heart that is there, and many other examples. So this code by itself builds so many questions in jurisprudence. For example, is it okay for a person to talk about the destiny of another person when they passed, their destination? And the answer is no. You cannot. How can you know when this is something that's connected to the unseen world? So this is one of the examples, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, which is a very powerful example actually. That's why in a traditional Islamism, they talk about it's not okay, it's not permissible for anyone to claim or say that this person's destination is that. What do I mean by that? When they pass away, for example, oh, God's going to punish them. Or for example, this person is not going to paradise. Or these type of ideologies, God will not show mercy on this person. So Islamically, it's not okay to do that. So this is one of the codes that is there. That everyone is rewarded for the intent that they have. Everyone's circumstance is different than the other person. Everyone's heart is different than the other person. Everyone's concept of goodness in life is going to be different. Some people, for example, the information they have received could be full of so much confusion, but those good things that they know and they hold fast to could be a means for their success. It could be very little. It could be something very little. So that's why you have prophetic traditions where the Prophet ﷺ, he said, he's talking to his companions, and he's saying basically, you are living in a time in which there is revelation. Your hearts are going to be different. There will be times in which people will come after you, many years after you. And what they do is they hold to just one portion of goodness. Just one portion of goodness, and that's the mean for their success. What he means, one portion of goodness, he's talking to them, he's saying, you are in a situation where your understanding, your circumstance, your vision is going to be different than people that come many years after. Now we're living in a circumstance, there's a lot of confusion in the world. Okay? There's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of doubt, there's a lot of questioning, there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of corruption, things which actually historically the Islamic sciences talked about. The hearts will change, the amana will be constrained within people because of the circumstances. Amana is truthfulness, it's piety, it's sincerity, it is trust. There will be widespread chaos, unfortunately there will be killing, there will be wars, these type of things. So confusion, there's a lot of confusion in the air. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. That little good that you know to be correct, jurisprudence scholars talk about, is the means for your success. Even if it is little, by itself, God willing, could be a great thing with God. And you never know. You never know. It might be little some things, but they're very important, they're very big. So he's talking to his disciples and he tells them, he says to them, listen, you are in a circumstance that's different than people afterwards. If you were to leave aside one portion that you are on, could be a means for your negativity. Let's say there's 10 portions of Islam. If you leave one of those, it could be a means for your negativity. But there will be people that come afterwards, if they just hold fast to 1/10, just 1/10 of what you're on, it's the means for their success. See, so this is a very wise statement. So consequently, even among scholars, rulings change, depend on each individual. That's why this field is so important. Rulings change depending on the circumstance of every individual. I'll give you an example here. Now this is going into the nitty-gritty a little bit, but it's okay. I think it's important. Philosophically, historically, the hijab of the female varied upon circumstance. Okay, varied upon circumstance. A person recently, we talked about this recently, a person came and he said, there is a female doctor who's a Muslim, she's living in the West. What happens is, she's wearing the hijab. Okay, and the hijab linguistically means a covering. And among jurists, there's more important parts of the body than others. The hair is not as important as the body. Okay, for example. And jurists talk about this very in great depth. Okay, the arm is not as important as the body, the more private areas. They talk about this in great depth. So now in this ideology, I'm talking about traditionalists. In this ideology, a question came up. There's a female scholar, a female doctor, and she's practicing medicine. And patients, there are male patients that come in, and she wears a hijab. So what she does is she pulls up her sleeves. She bares her arms. What happened was, this was a question she thought about. Okay, she's trying to be sincere as possible. She did what she could, and she went and asked somebody. And unfortunately, this person is supposedly a person who is of the field of understanding. And what happens is he tells her, no, you have to leave your job. You got to leave it. It's not okay. It's not okay for you to do that. He doesn't know, for example, from early traditionalists, Qadi Abu Yusuf from the Hanafi methodology, he used to say if it's needed for a female when she's working, for example, pull off her sleeve, it's fine for her to do so. Also in fiqh, it's more important for a person to help someone of the opposite gender when they are in need than, for example, not helping her. So Sufyan al-Thawri, he talks about a man, it's attributed to him, in which he comes past a female. She's in help, she needs help. And he says, I didn't touch her. I didn't want to touch her because the respects of the sexes. And Sufyan al-Thawri said it would have been more honorable with God if you touched her and helped her. You see, people are in need. How can people think doctors of different genders cannot help each other when they're in need of doing so? So this concept of al-a'malu bin-niyat is such a powerful thing. It's so powerful, and it's a long topic. There are many examples. And that's why this is from the qawa'id. These are from the foundations. And that's why everyone's Islam is similar on the foundational level. But when you go above foundation, it's going to change because of circumstances of people. They have to understand this culture of the people, their circumstance, their inner feelings, the way they are inner side, also on the outside, the things they are afflicted with, it's going to be different. Islamic dogma talks about one God. Everyone agrees one God. It talks about the concept of happiness and everlasting life. Everyone agrees. Prophets of God, messengers of God, scriptures of God, meeting with God, angels, you see, these type of things. But after you come out of the foundation, there's going to be different colors. So many different colors. And the actions of the people is going to be different. However, the most important thing is this here. Al-a'malu bin-niyat. This is the most, it's so powerful. It's a very powerful tradition that is taught. This is a tradition that was taught, actually, the Prophet taught it. And what happened, if I take a step to the side a little bit, in the science of hadith, there's something, or narration, there's something called mutawatir, there's something called hasan al-sahih lidatihi, and there is something called al-mashhur, there's something called al-ahad. It gets into deep details. This narration, the student of the Prophet learned it from him. And one day, as he was the Khalifa, the leader of this empire, stands in front of everybody, and he tells them in front of thousands of people, the Prophet taught us, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَىٰ. That's what he said in front of everybody. You see, and among these people that were with him were other disciples who had learned with him, and they all listened, they accepted, they felt wholehearted, because this is so important. That's why, as a side point, before we move on, you know when... We'll use this example for this code here, okay, number 4, because I think this is interesting. La darara wa la dirar, no oppression, injustice, no reciprocating oppression or injustice. In India, Islamic India, for a number of years, many brothers know how many years were Islamic India ruled by Islamic philosophy?
1,000 years.
It was a very long time. Great scholars, great ulama, and many interesting questions. Why interesting questions? Because the people they were dealing with, they faced people of the Hindu religion. Hinduism is very old. Okay? So there's a ruling body that is of a different theological belief, and they have people that are not sharing the same philosophy, meaning theologically. So the concept of la dara wa la dara comes into play, among other things. So a question arises, historically, there was a practice by certain people of different faiths that if a husband passed away and the mother was still alive, the wife was still alive, it would be an honor for the wife to be burned alive with the body that is burned, cremated. So the husband passes away, the wife remains, it's honorable for her to go into the fire with him and pass away. This was a question, a practice that was happening during this era. So now you have judges in courts, for example, in the Islamic philosophy, who these people of a different philosophical belief came to ask them questions. Now this is the ruling, this is the circumstance. I would like to, for my free choice, go and do this. This is what my religion teaches me. Okay? So as judges, they're facing this. So they know there are certain codes, you see, and they know that there are so many different philosophies, among other things. So what they concluded out of their own probability of reaching a goal that is of benefit is they can only advise. They can only advise her. So what was the advice? It was, we'll take care of you, you don't need to do that. We'll take care of you, the government will pay for you and your children, and take care of you, give you food, all of these things. In the end, it's your choice. However, we don't recommend it, we don't advise it. So that was the ruling they gave, and then she gets to choose what she wanted to do. No oppression, injustice, no reciprocating it. It's one philosophy in its meaning. Yes, sir.
And for the Muslim judges at the situation, they give the advice, as you said, if it's only non-Muslim. So that's a question.
One more time. What do you mean only non-Muslim?
So for the woman, of course in Islam, it is forbidden to go and violate yourself.
Yeah.
So, and you said the judges at this time, they were Muslims.
Yeah.
And this woman came from a different belief, so they give an advice.
Yeah.
So I want to ask about a case, if that woman was a Muslim, what would be their advice? Will it be advice or a command?
I really don't know. So there's this something, what I mean by I really don't know, philosophically among jurists, is they like to discuss questions when it happens. So when you can, for example, show me a tangible question, I can respond to through philosophy different rulings. But I don't know historically that there was an example in which a woman wanted to go in the fire, literally went to the court and said, I want to go in the fire and burn myself with my husband who has passed away. And it was of the theological belief of Islam. I don't know of an example of that. You see?
Yeah.
However, I think it could be more relevant to our time, is when there is a people that are ruling a country and they hold a different theological belief than people that are following. So for example, Muslims with Hindus in that region, Muslims in the Greater Syria with Christians and Jews and etc. How do they deal with each other? I'm talking about historically. Times have changed, circumstances have changed now, the fiqh changes now. But I'm talking about historically. Fiqh has changed now. This is very important to understand. Historically, this was a discussion they used to talk about. And one of the methods they used to handle it was they would appoint people of that faith, because previously they used to try and govern through the teachings of a faith. So for example, there are certain teachings in the Islamic perspective, certain details that might be different than a person of a different theological belief, Christianity for example. So what they used to do in their observation, they would appoint scholars from their own philosophy, own theology, and they would basically be in support of the ruling system. So when this case comes up and it dealt with people of a different theological belief, they would say, go to these scholars, and they will be basically your court system at that time. So it was a very innovative method in handling. It is in fiqh, it's called fiqh al-aqalliyat. There are two meanings to it. That is when, for example, there are Muslims that are living as a minority in a region, and the other possible meaning is that when there's a person of a different theological perspective or a different group of a different theology living in a majority Islamic population. So there's particular fiqh for that. So this is very important. Not everything is just black and white and there's a big swoop. This is very important. That's why al-a'malu bin-niyat. That's the most important thing. And it's a very beautiful thing. And God subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Islamic perspective, He's aware, He's living, He sees, He knows your hearts. He knows your attempt to do good. He knows that you're trying to produce good. He knows all of these things. And He knows that, for example, at times you can make mistakes. But that's why
you have to make mistakes.
You're going to make mistakes. Or you might not necessarily reach a better goal at times. But you do the best you can. And that's why there is a code. This is another code, but we're not showing it here. Is if there is a judge or a jurist or an individual who tries to reach a conclusion to the best of their ability and laxes, it's still considered a good deed.
Yeah.
It's a reward of goodness. Whereas there's another person who does the same thing, he uses probability, the correct method of probability, he reaches the goal, he gets 2. Yeah. It means it's more. Yeah? More. You see? So in this ideology, this helps clarify many things. That's actually another code. So a person can do the best he can in a question, and he does the best, but with God it's good, even if he made a mistake. If he approached it correctly. Yeah. God is merciful.
I remember another college hadith, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, إنما الأعمال بالخواتيم.
بالخواتيم, yeah.
Right? So this means that the niyyah, intention, is not something that remained the same throughout when you were acting or doing something good, for example. That's why we need to look into our intentions time and again, right?
So this fiqh observation, al-a'mal bil-khawatim, is an observation that really, it shows a person can start out an action in a certain way. But what happens is, the next few hours or the next day or before you pass away, your heart changes, your intent changes. So that's why it could be a person who starts out in negativity in their life. If we were to look at it in a macro method, they start out the life in negativity, but towards the end of their life, the heart has changed and they're humble and they pass away like this. So that end of their life, God willing, will overcome those negativities they have done when it is very sincere. That's the thing. Yeah, people could say things all they want, but God, He really knows who's sincere or not. And that's why in this philosophy you find other quotes. 2 drops of the eyes in the midst of the night is a means for the person's pardon, success. The ideology is not that you look into the sun until your eyes tear, or you poke something in your eye and it tears. It's talking about something very sincere. And there's another narration where it says that God basically has pardoned a person who, by themselves, they start to tear up because they worry. They say, maybe God is not going to forgive me. I'm trying the best I can out of awe and respect for God, and it tears up. And they do it very sincerely. So consequently, that negativity isn't there. من بكى من خشية الله سبحانه وتعالى حرم عليه النار وكما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. And the ayah, the hadith مشهور يعني يظل الله في ظله يوم لا ظل إلا ظله رجل خالد فبكى في خشية الله سبحانه وتعالى. So there's a lot of information here. And there are a lot of other codes as well that hopefully in the near future we'll go into more details. Why did we bring this slide again from last week's lecture? Is because we are trying to reach something of an understanding, which is the goal of the course. We talked about Islamic epistemology, and really the essence of epistemology in Arabic is something called fiqh. It is something called fiqh. This one right here. How do you understand that? It's been translated at times as understanding jurisprudence. However, let me ask you your opinion. When you hear fiqh, how do you understand this word? Fiqh.
Understanding of deen.
Understanding of deen. What else?
Rules and regulations.
Rules and regulations, okay. Is there anything else?
For me, as a Muslim, especially we know that there is tawheed, that there is fiqh. Fiqh is my daily limits.
Okay. Very interesting. Do you have an opinion? Observation?
Comprehension and application of knowledge.
Okay. You want to give it?
Thinking about interpretation of knowledge.
Okay, very good. So what we have so far as a group is we have something that's connected to the outward actions and also the intellect. So this is what I understood from your opinions and point of views about things. So fiqh is a very pluralistic word. It has so many meanings. Okay, it's a very powerful word. The phonetics, what's phonetics?
Yeah, you know
It's like the syllable thing.
the way it is, the spelling or the grammar.
Very good. Yeah, pronunciation, invisible word. Very good, right? Space or space? What does space mean? Space or space? Which one? What does it mean?
It means many things.
There is space and there is space. Give me some space. Hey, I want some space. A lot of things.
Semantics.
Semantics, very important. The meaning of words. Living languages will continuously have different meanings. Languages that have died, Latin, it's a little bit more easy to understand meanings of each word. Because living languages, words' meaning has changed. It changes over time. And you look to dictionaries 40 years ago, some words, its meaning is different than, for example, present-day meaning of that word in present-day dictionaries. Semantics is very important. Can you give us some examples of some words that have changed and or have different multiple meanings? Cool. So, for example?
It's pretty cool today.
It's pretty cool today, and also?
you're a cool guy.
You're a cool guy.
Smart.
Spank?
Smart. S-M-A-R-T, smart. And in British, we say he's a smart guy. It's like kind of like lean, physically fit.
Oh, there we go. Very interesting.
We say it's smart.
And in Arabic, the word sheikh.
That's right. You're sheikh.
The word good.
Yeah, that's right. See, right? See, the letter C, to see with the eyes. Spring, it's spring, or something is a spring. Or sound of the ear, sound of the water. So many things. We talked about hit, to hit something. And hit could mean so many things. In slang in the States, right now we're trying to keep our language a little bit more proper. But if we were to talk as we usually talk, growing up, I hit that thing. It doesn't mean you hit it hard. It means I tried it out. I hit that drink. I tried that drink out. I drank it. So it's very interesting. These are living languages, something to consider. Do you have any opinions or considerations of that?
No, not right now.
All right, now, okay, great. The phonetics and the semantics, fiqh, so powerful, so important. This is what's missing from so many people nowadays. This is what's missing from people who are supposedly supposed to be talking about on behalf of the religion and Muslims. This right here. It is so complex. It's so important. It's not only intellectual. You guys talked about physical, but you talked about it religiously. But it also means character of the person. How so? Ahmed bin Hanbal, rahimahullah ta'ala, when he talked about the intellect, requirements to give a fatwa, and he talks about the requirements. He says the person, Islamic knowledges, of course. But then he talks about something. The character of the person. أَنْ يَكُونَ حَلِيمًا. One of the things he said. He be of the character of having forbearance within them. Halim is a very important character to have within a person. To be merciful. You see, to be merciful. So nowadays, for example, people are taking the stage and attempting to speak on behalf of Islam and Muslims. And just their character by itself contradicts these things that the scholars beforehand used to talk about as criterias. You know, Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala, he was asked by the Khalifa at that time, Umar, to take a position as a mayor and judge of an area. And he said, I fear that I won't be able to judge with the characteristic of being Halim. To be Halim. Personal, forbearing. These type of, it's missing from people's lives. You see, it really is missing from people's lives, unfortunately. And it's missing from these individuals that are supposedly an example that people, both intellectually and in character. They're talking about the religion. Some observations in the meaning. Arabic grammar a little bit. What's the ism and what's the fi'l? You can see it up there. But ism is?
It's a noun.
It's the noun. Right? It's the subject, it's the noun.
Yeah.
And the fi'l, or the fa'il.
Action.
Action. Fa'il is?
Subject.
The fa'il is the one doing that action, the subject. Among other things. So, with a kasra, right, with a kasra, it entails alima. What does alima mean?
He knows.
He knows.
Yeah.
But what is known? That's the question. So this is in the fi'l sense. Knowledge is knowing, right? It also means improving. So with the kasra, faqih, also it means improving. So this is very interesting. Not a lot of people know that it also means improving, to improve. That's very interesting. Improving your mind, improving your character, your manners. Edify, what does this mean, this word mean?
Edify.
Elevate, I don't know.
Close to modify.
So it's a good observation. So it's basically a synonym.
Yeah.
Bettering yourself, bettering character, elevating yourself, these things. So you hear the word fiqh and you think jurisprudence, you think books. But how come we're not thinking improving mind or character? So a person asks a question, he's asked a question, you want to respond to it. You want to use fiqh. There is jurisprudence, there's these things, but are you responding for the betterment of the person? If you know, for example, you're going to respond in a certain fashion, and that person is not going to be able to fulfill it, what's the point of you responding like that? Now, what's the point of you responding like that? If you know, for example, you're going to respond to someone and they themselves don't have that character in them, the response you're giving, correlating to the character, why would you respond to him in that fashion? Some people are naturally, they don't have as a strong zeal of other people. Some people are calmer than other people that have anger. Some people have sugar issues in their body. Some people, their way they think is completely different than other people. Some people, for example, black and white, there's no black and white in their life. What do we mean by black and white? We're not talking about skin colors. We mean
The understanding of the world.
yeah, understanding the world. It's very complex for them. They look to something and they say, this is not an object. This is not an object. For them, these are small particles. Because if you go deeper and deeper and deeper, it turns into small particles. It's very deep for them. It's, you know, you look to them and you know, for some other people, they're like, whoa, I don't know how I can do, but the person has to be aware. So that's why fiqh is being aware of these things. Here I'm talking about the word fiqh when you're talking to someone else, in the light of an Islamic perspective. Linguistically, again, it's a betterment of mind, betterment of character, and the methods for that. Islamic epistemology. And the Islam doctrine, jurisprudence, that's all under Islamic epistemology. So a person could be using certain, in the Islamic epistemology perspective of doctrine, in their daily lives, but they don't notice it. So they could be using grammar, correct grammar, or they could be using correct logic or rhetoric when we talk about the trivium, Greek trivium, we talked about that.
Yes.
They could be knowing these things. I'm sorry, they could not be knowing that this is a subject, or this is a title, or this is a topic, but they still use it in their daily lives. While other people, they don't know these things. They don't know these goals. They don't know these rules, and or they don't know the meaning of these things, among other things. So for them to study such things, it enables them, it unlocks the mind. Islamic epistemology, unlocking the mind, opening your observation, making yourself better, improving mind and character. Fiqh, improving the mind and character. It's so important. You're raising your hand.
Yeah, I was raising my hand at the point when you talk about when you're giving an advice to someone, you have to be understanding. Which is, I was just making a comment. For example, if you are telling a person, the first thing you say to them is repent to God.
Yeah.
Before even identify what is God for them. Like the person you're talking, he doesn't have a God. And you walk to him and you say, repent to God. It's like, before, like you tell him a verb, repent, without identifying God, which makes a huge problem.
Definitely. How so? What is God?
How you can tell me repent?
Yeah. Who's God to him? You know, who's God?
It's like two different sizes, two small words, and it spans so much.
Many big things. But who's God to him? God is relevant. There's a lot of relativity. Who is God? People have all these different understanding of who is God to them. So when you talk about the trivium and these goals, you have to be able, if you're going to talk to someone, you have to be able to agree in the meaning of something. And then you'll be able to expand from there. But if you don't know, for example, what Islamic extremism means, how can you fix this issue? Do you see? I don't know what Islamic extremism means. How is it that you know what Islamic extremism means? I don't like Islamic extremism. What is Islamic extremism? So it's something that is, you have to be able to agree with. So I can elaborate. Linguistic examples from the word of fiqh. So fiqh has been used in literature, in language, among other things. But at the same time, I'm sorry, what's the time? 2:40? Okay. Hopefully we'll try to shoot for 3 o'clock. Inshallah. So fiqh has been used in literature, it has been used in the Quran, it has been used in prophetic traditions. What we have in front of us are some examples from the Quran of this word and how it has been used for us to think about here. يَفْقَهُ قَوْلِي, يَفْقَهُ, my speech. Famous verse. Who is saying this? Who is he saying it to?
You know, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, Lord Fir'aun.
To who? What was I? I couldn't hear him, sorry. What were you saying? I'm sorry. I couldn't hear you.
Well, he speaks to God that, perhaps Fir'aun could understand my speech.
Rabbi Shrah.
Yeah, right? Rabbi Shrah li sadri. So Moses, prayer to God for something interesting. He says, Rabbi Shrah li sadri. What's that mean? Okay, we want to translate it. How will you translate it? I'm going to translate it one way. Tell me if this sounds correctly. Ishrah li sadri. Make ease my breasts. How, if someone reads this and he doesn't know there is the spirit, there is semantics, there is fiqh, they will get confused.
Yeah.
So how can we understand that statement? Rabbi shrah li sadri.
So what I understand is, when I would translate it, that's what we have learned, is open up my heart. My heart. So that the Rabbi Shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri, and make my work easy for me, my job easy for me. Rabbi Shrah li sadri wa
So
yassir
what
li
does,
amri.
you said heart. What does heart mean? How am I supposed to open my heart?
It's kind of like, when I tell something so people understand me. So open up my heart.
Okay,
Don't make it constricted.
constrict. So you don't mean open heart surgery.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, very good. All right, yeah. It doesn't mean that. It's very important. What do you brothers understand from Rabbi Shrah li sadri?
I kind of take it in the same way, but as opposed to opening my heart, like linguistically, like being able to communicate, open my heart as in make me able to comprehend what they're saying. So open my heart as in make me accepting of the things they say, understanding of it, so that
Very
I
good.
can digest and put it back.
Very good. So, heart, sadr, chest, you have to understand what it means. This is not the letter here.
Yeah.
This is not necessarily the letter, there is the spirit. Also, ishrah, that word as well. A lot of meaning to it, right? This is a supplication. So Moses makes 8 supplications approximately, but something to think about. This is actually, if you were to think about it among how the Arabs used to think about it, to have a constrained chest is something negative.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you can't breathe well. There's something more to it. And from that meaning is fiqh. From that meaning, not having the capability to comprehend, having that tranquility in your comprehension, having that comfort within yourself of understanding this particular thing, is a very powerful statement they used to say. That's why this is something important to consider. Rabbi Shrah li sadri, which was a prerequisite to this supplication, is a statement that turns to the concept of fiqh in jurists. Why so? Is because a jurist or a person that doesn't have tranquility in themselves, they don't have understanding in themselves, they don't have mercy within themselves, they shouldn't be judging or responding to this particular matter. So here, to be a judge is one of the lower levels, I don't want to say lower levels, it's one of the subcategories of prophethood. Okay? So here, he made the supplication, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in this observation, He gave him that response. And he already had this response within him. In this light, he was a person who God chose. He knew what type of person he was. Because in the light of Islamic dogma, prophets are very good people. God doesn't necessarily choose at random. People have good qualities. So He chose this person. He knows that this person already has an expanded chest. It doesn't mean he's long, wide shoulders. Arid bayn al-mankabayn. He's a person that has a character within him. He has understanding, he has comprehension. He's a person that can relate to the people at that time. So what happens is, he knows this. And Moses makes a supplication for more because of the importance. Now, this is important to know. So Moses had this quality. If he didn't have this quality, it wouldn't be deserving for him to hold that position. Jurisprudent-wise, in fiqh, a person to be able to look to a text preemptively has to have these type of qualities. He need not to be blocked by partisanship or a particular agenda or goal. You have to be able to be tranquil within yourself when you're looking to something or a situation. And hopefully we'll talk about that shortly, inshallah. But this is something very important to consider. So he says, رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَدْرِي وَيَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي. He does these ayat, these supplications many of us know. And then he says, يَفْقَهُ قَوْلِي. And how do we understand يَفْقَهُ قَوْلِي here? How do we understand that? What does this mean? يَفْقَهُ قَوْلِي.
So that they understand my point.
Understand the point. What else is it?
On a surface level, it's so they understand my words, but on a more technical level, to really comprehend, to take in, digest, and meditate upon, I guess, the things that I'm saying sincerely and wholeheartedly.
The things I'm saying sincerely. And it goes very deep, more than this, but this is, as you talked about and the brother gave, it gets quite deep actually. And you look to these topics, and for example, Fakhruddin al-Razi, the Mufassir, on this, just the statement here and brother Ayat, it goes on for so many pages. It gets very deep. It gets very deep. Another example, the word fiqh. The fiqh is here. يَفْقَهُونَ قَوْلًا. قَوْلِي, what does this ya make it?
Ma.
Possessive, right?
Yeah.
Possessive. And qawlan, what does this make it? So qaw is the same. Qaw is the same. Lam is the same, but here there's an alif for the indication of something.
Yeah, their words.
Is it their word or
Someone else's.
what was it, ma'am?
Now the word.
The word. Very good. Words.
Yeah.
But we will come to what you mean their words. Back here is their words.
Yeah.
So ayah is very famous. Where is the ayah located? Surah Al-Kahf. Surah Al-Kahf. Who is speaking here? حتى إذا بلغ بين السدين.
This is about Dhul Qarnayn.
Who's speaking though? Whose voice? Attributed to God.
Yeah.
It's about who? حتى إذا بلغ Dhul Qarnayn. What's Dhul Qarnayn mean in Arabic? Qarnayn,
Yeah.
right? Dhu means
Two.
Qarnayn means
Yeah.
two.
You know the owner or the.
Very good.
Who have.
So Dhu also has that indication. Qarnayn, two horns. Does it really mean two horns?
Yeah.
This is very interesting. So was he wearing a Viking's helmet? And that's why he was given the name Qarnayn.
Yeah.
See? Qarnayn can also mean, there's narration that talk about Qarn al-Shaytan and these type of things. But it doesn't mean a literal point of a ram's head. It represents the strength and or power and or essence, depending on the element. Dhul Qarnayn was a person who, in the Islamic theme, was who?
He helped a lot of, he also helped the Jews to, give them their freedom.
So he had strength, he had power.
Yes.
He was a king?
Yeah.
He was a king. He had a lot of capability. Correct? حتى إذا بلغ بين السدين. What does بلغ mean? بين السدين. What does sadain mean?
2 blocks.
Two mountain blocks, elements, big things. These are all possibility. بلغ بين السدين وجد من دونهما قوما لا يكادون يفقهون قولا. So you can see the translation, the brief translation of the meaning. Our goal is to reach here. So now in Hafs, the way we read it, many of us, حتى إذا بلغ بين السدين وجد من دونهما قوما لا يكادون يفقهون قولا. Other recitations, حتى إذا بلغ بين السدين سدين. Saddaini, some linguists talk about it being a construction done by human beings. But in Suddaini in Arabic, it means something God has placed there, such as mountains. So this is a very interesting observation. وَجَدَ مِن دُونِهِمَا قَوْمًا لَا يَكَادُونَ يَفْقَهُونَ or يُفْقِهُونَ. Another recitation, يُفْقِهُونَ قَوْلًا. يَفْقَهُونَ يُفْقِهُونَ قَوْلًا. Why is this important? Let's take a step back. Qarnayn goes to a region. He finds that people that are in trouble. They're living in a particular region. Some argue Armenia, Turkey, all of these areas. Okay, these regions were rich because he was able to traverse quite a bit of land. He had a vast land. He goes to these people. He reaches a people who يكادوا أن يفقهوا قولا, right? حتى إذا بلغ بين السدين وجد من دونهما قوما لا يكادون. What does يكادون mean?
Little.
What is it?
Little.
You know,
Yeah.
about, or almost.
Very good. As if he met a people that in the two recitations, يفقهون and يفقهون, means the way they talk to you, you can't understand, and when you speak to them, you cannot understand. They cannot understand. So the recitation covers both meaning. So they were a people that had a language that was different. As if someone could not comprehend anything they're saying. They were able to relate, some argue, because they were able to use with their hands and say this and that with some of their speeches, among other things. Because what happens in the next ayah is as if so now they're speaking. And now they're telling Qarnayn about the issue they have. So it means that they have a language that is different. Qarnayn could not understand what they're saying, except for a little bit. And they themselves, if the Qarnayn spoke to them, or his observation was to speak to them, they were unable to comprehend what he was saying. This is the issue. But the word here, يَفْقَهُونَ قَوْلًا or يُفْقِهُونَ قَوْلًا, means what? قَوْلًا. Speech, he said. A wording, speaking to or hearing from. So what they had here was the people that needed help. The word fiqh was used here. We talked about the meaning of fiqh. One of the meanings is to become better intellectually and in character. يَفْقَهُونَ قَوْلًا, getting benefit from the speech. Having benefit from Dhul Qarnayn's speech and or the opposite as well. Being able, Dhul Qarnayn, to help them with the speech that they are saying. وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ وَلَكِنْ لَا تَفْقَهُونَ تَسْبِيحَهُ. Very powerful ayah. Okay, it's a very powerful ayah. There's a lot of ta'weel on it. The design, in one observation, has a sense of God's presence. That's one observation. But the question is, what is meant? Where is the damir here? A number of things. Who is it? وَلَكِنْ لَا تَفْقَهُونَ. Who is these people? تَفْقَهُونَ. Where's the damir?
Anything besides God, like everything in the universe.
That's an observation.
Yeah.
So it's about. So that's an observation, correct? If we were to look a few ayahs before, who's memorized this chapter? Al-Isra.
You mean the chapter?
No, the few ayahs beforehand.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of like about the glorification of Allah.
Yeah, okay. يسبح له السماوات السبع والأرض ومن فيهن. That's the beginning of the ayah.
Yeah.
But what are ayahs before it? Any idea? لو كان معهما إله لابتغوا إلى ذي العرش سبيلا سبحانه وتعالى عما يقولون علوا كبيرا تسبح له السماوات السبع والأرض ومن شيء وإن من شيء لا يسبح بحمده. So the damir, who is speaking? God speaking to, he's talking to a people that didn't necessarily consider the monotheistic approach to God. Okay? In this light, and we don't denounce that aspect. But in this light, لا تفقهون تسبيحهم is talking about a people who don't necessarily understand, comprehend that the design around them is a representation, an ayah, signs of God, and at the same time they themselves notice that. They themselves know of God's existence. So that's one ta'wil. So in this ta'wil, for example, it goes into greater details. For example, you find a statement, interesting statement, where Prophet Muhammad, he comes to Medina and he sees a mountain and he says, أُحُدٌ جَبَلٌ يُحِبُّنَا وَنُحِبُّهُ. Mount Uhud is a mountain that loves us and we love it. So the mountain in this observation has a sensibility of the goodness that happens on it and or around it. This is one observation and meaning. Trees, plants, they have a sensibility, they have a life, they have an existence. So they have feeling. You go into science, they do indicate trees do have feeling, which is very interesting. And in this light, for example, one day, it is argued, Muhammad ﷺ, he passes graves, and he's at these graves, And in one perspective, these graves were a people of a different theological belief. They were a people who understood, comprehended, and they chose out of a sense of arrogance to abstain. So people tend to translate the meaning of kufr to infidel, and that's not correct. Or kuffar, or kafir as infidel. It's not correct. It's a very pluralistic word, and it means a lot of things depending on the context. Now, why is this important? He comes across these graves, and he sees them. Different theological belief. This is one observation, the ta'wil. And what he does, and he asks his friend to get him a piece of branches. Okay, pieces of branches. Takes the pieces of branches, breaks it into two, puts one piece on this grave and the other piece on the other grave. And he says, I hope with this presence, for example, it will make their circumstance easier for them. Now, why would you think that in the light of this verse? Why would you think that in the light of this verse? How some have taken into observation the meaning.
Yes.
Why would you think, in that example,
Yeah.
how would you be able to relate it in this type of verse?
So, other than the Prophet ﷺ, they could not recognize or feel the feeling of the deceased there. But the Prophet ﷺ felt their feeling. That's how he understood and he put that in, prayed to God then. He eased their situation.
In the light of this verse, وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ لَا يُسَبِّحُ حَمْدِهِ, if we were to do ta'wil, as when we say ta'wil, interpretation, in this philosophy, that وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ لَا يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ, things that we may think, such as branches or trees, previously thought that it was basically no sense to them. But actually they do have a sense. They do have feeling that is relative to them. And in this light, they have a sense of recognition of God, presence of God. They recognize things such as goodness that happens around them, and among other things, in this observation. So now we have a branch, as you proposed, and yes, he felt what they were going through, and he's a prophet of mercy, one of the pillars of Islam. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. God, Muhammad is sent as an ambassador, as a mercy to mankind. That's the goal. Building the gap between the heavens. When we say heavens, God to the design. So having a type of gap between the two, filling it in. In this light, he does this, but the question still remains, why the branches, or why these pieces?
Because they also remember Allah and glorify Allah.
Okay, that's it. They have a sensibility. They have a sensibility. And through the observations of good words, observations of good feelings, people that surround you that are good, people are affected by it. So now, for example, I don't know if you've read a book, it's called About Water, The Hidden Message of Water. A very powerful book. Komoto, Dr. Komoto, I don't know if you know who this man is. Great research. What he does, and long story short, in this research, he says there's a hidden message in water. And he argues that when there's good speech, good themes, good things around it, the water, it takes in these things. And he goes on to argue that what he did was he basically took water and he placed it in different circumstances. And then he took this water and placed it into a freezer. Then he went and looked at the skeletal makeup of the water that has been frozen. And he noticed when there's good speech or good words or good environment around the water is affected. And it crystallizes differently than bad speech, bad environment, and these type of things. So this is something he argued. Something to think about. You should try to read it. It's called The Hidden Message of Water. He has a few books actually on the topic. It's very interesting. It's very beautiful. His goal is to cause peace in life. He wants peace in the existence of people. And in the things he says, basically, one of the goals to reaching this peace is you have to be able to relate to people. And everyone can relate to water. We are from water. We're created from water. And thus his argument grows from there. We have a verse in the Quran where it says about water.
Yeah,
every existing living being, a human being, for example, from water, an element of water. No difference between black or white, illa min taqwa. So that's one observation. This is a deep ayah that goes on more, but we'll try to wrap it up because of the time, inshallah, here. What's the time, Brother Umar? 3:01. We can finish this slide next week, inshallah. But it built off our observation, and it talks about the importance of fiqh, the preconditions of fiqh, and that a person should not, in any way, when we talk about the intellectual perspective, be prevented from benefiting good because of a preconceived motion or feeling or philosophy, something of that nature. Allahu a'lam, subhanahu wa ta'ala. If there are any questions or observations you'd like to say, feel free to ask away. This is the time. On the topic or outside the topic, just for a few minutes, inshallah.
When you place the branches on the graves, and you said that the souls will benefit from that praise of God, does that allow us to, by extension, assume that anything? So if you recite Quran for somebody who has departed from this world, that will also benefit, because that is also a debatable argument within religion.
So I think actually you responded to your question.
That's debatable.
Debatable argument.
But then again, that would lead to you to question the validity, authenticity of the original story.
Yeah,
but then there are no answers.
So in one observation, when you said that is debatable, what I meant by that is that, for example, a person has ended their life. And at this point, if a person was to come and say, for example, I'm going to do good, and I want to take this good and I want to give it to this person who has passed away. This is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about person has passed away and you pray to God to make things easy for them, to have mercy on them, to take away the burdens they go through, to make their path happier for them, among other things. That's a different topic. That's welcomed. That's welcomed, to pray for people, among other things. It's welcomed. But what we're talking about is someone has passed, and then, for example, right now I just went through all of this, and now I say, I'm going to send all of this good to this person who has passed away. That's something else.
That's debatable.
That's but dua, these things, that's welcome tremendously. And in the idea of what in this narration, Prophet ﷺ did it was basically a supplication. It was a dua for the betterment of the person. So he had this observation, but he also extended it through the observation that hopefully these elements that have a good environment in themselves could spread their goodness to other people around them. That was his observation.
I didn't mean to question the authenticity of the story. I just meant that there is always going to be so many views available within religion, and to support each view there is always going to be an argument, and maybe as we go along the course we will.
And that's a good point.
Answer the question of how we know what we know.
Yeah, that's very good. That's a good point. And hopefully this is our goal to within the course, to help us within that. However, always the foundations. The foundations is optimism. With God, the foundations is optimism. That's a rule. And that's why there's a narration that says,
Yes.
a person, basically God is relevant to how you perceive.
Yes.
If you think God is not going to forgive you, for example, that could be a means for your negativity. But the goal of Islam is to person to be optimistic, especially when it comes to God. So this is the foundation. So in this light, God's mercy, optimistic. My supplications, my dua to Him, optimism. Help for other people, optimism. Always being optimistic to the best of their ability and not pessimistic. Allahu A'lam.
So, Shaykh, I had this question that looking to the current jurist and fuqaha that we have in our today's world, coming from different area of understanding of Islam, like traditionalist and literalist, Hafi, from Hafiyya, traditionalist. So, you think that they also go through the same, teachings of usul al-fiqh, like the way you described that so much, openness in understanding the circumstances that a society live in, and then they give their opinions or fatwa. So, the traditionalist and the literalist, I just think that are they not comprehending on the usul al-fiqh, the way they are giving fatwas to the society that is so black and white or narrow-minded, or?
Jazakallah khair. So Saint Augustine, he talked about this. St. Augustine of the Christian background, he talked about certain extremism and mistakes Christians were making. He said it's because of the lack of the trivium, the lack of studying of grammar, the lack of logic and rhetoric. Because they're exposing themselves to things without having tools or code to be able to understand how this element is written, the voice and these things. Nowadays, I'm not talking about previous fuqaha. Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi was from the Zahiri madhab, and he was an intellectual. He was a philosopher, he was a great faqih, he was a great muhaddith. Doesn't mean he's perfect.
Yeah, and people now, they perceive him as a strong literalist, but as you said, he was very open-minded.
He was actually, people would be surprised how. A lot of things against him actually was because of his character.
Yeah.
Just because the way he wrote in his polemics, he was very stern in the things he said. He would be actually quite sharp in his speech, and he would degrade certain opinions. However, yes, he did write about philosophy. He was extremely intellectual. He actually came back from a philosophical background. And it is argued in one perspective that one day he came to the mosque and he sat down and a person came to him and he tells him, why did you do Tahiyatul Masjid?
Yeah.
And he's confused. He's like, oh, okay, so he did it. Another day he did it again in a time in which there is, in one opinion, karaha. And the person says, what are you doing? It's karaha time. So he said, from that day, I'm going to study fiqh. That's what is argued.
Yeah.
From this day, I'm going to go and learn now. He went and he learned and he became a very deep, interesting individual. However, no one is perfect. Now, if we take a step back from Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi, nowadays what we have is we don't have people that are studying fiqh as it should be. Usul al-fiqh and fiqh as it should be, as they used to talk about previously. One example, Ali radiallahu ta'ala, in his time, he came across a person who's giving a lecture. And then he asked him, do you know the difference between a nasikh wal mansukh in the Quran?
Yeah.
And he said, no. He said, you should sit down. Here's what he said. Because there's a voice out there now that is saying, for example, God in the Quran, there are things, there are levels. Things are very easy. It's very clear. God is one, these things, paradise, these things. There's another level, you need a little bit more knowledge. There's a third level, you need more knowledge. Fourth level, there's deeper knowledge.
Yeah.
Nowadays, what happens is we have a type of movement out there that isn't necessarily correct. They are attempting to approach these things that is not of their caliber, or of the third category and the fourth category, without the background and tools to be able to do so. And that is why nowadays, a lot of people are doing more mistakes than they are doing good. They are causing more harm than they are doing good. Imam al-Suyuti, he said it. The issues people are facing nowadays, and he also goes to talk about other things. He says that from the foundational things they used to make sure it was important for a student of knowledge was to study fiqh. It opens the mind. You see. So going back to what you said, this is an issue, unfortunately. And nowadays, a lot of people, they don't have very strong background in usul al-fiqh or al-fiqh. A lot of them. In Al-Azhar and other ulama scholars, they used to be able to differentiate between a first-year student, a second-year student, a third-year student. Not because of the strength of his Arabic, necessarily, or what he can recite from memory. They recognized it because of the manners he had when it came to topics of the secondary field. The aggression, the aggressiveness, and you could hear it in the way that they talk, the way they speak. You can realize they're missing codes, they're missing foundations, they're missing comprehension, they're missing viewpoints. Mathematics, 1 + 1 = 2, 3 - 1 = 2, 2 × 1 is 2, 2 divided by 1 is 2. So many routes to a particular goal. And this is things that people are missing, unfortunately. It's a deep topic, I appreciate the question. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Can we I don't know if it's possible, can we change the day for this lecture?
I will leave you guys to decide on that. I have to run.
Take care,
Thank you
yeah.
so
Take care,
much.
yeah. Allah for
Well, it's up to the share. We can get room any day, inshallah, next room will be a little bit bigger, a little bit more. This is not the room, I think, in my opinion. But,
Allah for
I'm very okay with Sunday. I mean, but there are many people.
There's going to be people studying Saturday, Sunday. So it's up to you.